When you think of Xbox, a lot of people immediately think of the Halo franchise, or Forza, or maybe even a subscription service like Game Pass. For me, there's only one title that comes to mind, and that's Gears of War. I remember as clear as day taking a chance and renting it from my local video store and thinking I'd immediately hate it. Looking at the cover art alone, it seemed like a horror shooter, but it was something much more than that. Yes, it had horrifying moments like whenever a berserker would walk onto the screen, but it was a explosive, testosterone, gore-filled ride. Gears 5 was the latest entry in the series, and while the campaign followed the evolving story of the Swarm and sidebarring the Phoenix family, you can tell this wasn't the Gears of old. With the release of the Xbox Series X and Gears 5 being optimized at 120 frames per second in 4K and multiplayer, I thought I'd tap my Gears brother-in-arms on the shoulder and replay the Gears campaign and try to see why it doesn't really feel like a Gears game.
It's Foz, right?
Yes, sir.
Shut the fuck up, Foz.
Now, I'll be getting into spoilers with the entry of Gears 5 and the series as a whole, just as a FYI. Now, Gears 1 to 3 are in my opinion the best of the series. Gears 1 gave us a simple story but a fantastic gameplay and gave us some memorable moments, enemies and characters. Gears 2 gave us a fantastic story, and rather than following a general story focused around the character of Marcus, we helped out our brother-in-arms Dominic find his missing wife Maria, and oof, it's still a hard scene to watch. Gears 3 changed the world and the gameplay of Gears slightly. Gears 3 wrapped up the ongoing war between the COG, Coalition of Ordered Governments, and the Locust. Even aesthetically, Gears 1 and Gears 2 had a winter feel to it, while Gears 3 gave us sun, sand, blood, and boats. It's a little comparable to the original Star Wars trilogy. Introduction of characters and world, fantastic story and improves in every scenario, and the final last-ditch fight against evil and stopping the war once and for all. Gears Judgment was a game. Great premise, but somewhat poor execution if you ask me. But honestly, in my opinion, more entries set in and around Emergence Day would be great. Gears 4 then came out and basically did what The Force Awakens did for Star Wars. The game is set well after the events of Gears 3, and you play as the main character Marcus Phoenix, his son James. The Locusts have evolved and changed and are now known as the Swarm, and they're somehow tied into the new character of the series, Kate. Gears 4 ended with a revelation that Kate was the granddaughter of Queen Mira. Are you starting to see some connections here? And she sets out to find out more about her heritage. That's where Gears 5 starts. You'll have the traditional prologue teaching you how to play the game and then sets up the fall of James Phoenix. And from here, rather than the traditional levels that we've gotten with every other entry in the series, we got something completely different and not really in a good way. Gears 5's prologue plays like every other entry in the series, but then we go into an open world in two small sandbox areas. You'll make your way through frozen mountaintops and Mad Max-inspired wastelands. Then finally, at the end of the campaign, you'll be given a choice on who lives and who dies.
He's got a heartbreaking decision to make about whether his best friend lives or dies.
Which again, we've never seen in a Gears game before. However, the story doesn't feel that long. Yes, the campaign can be extended by doing side missions in the open area aspects of the game, but just when you think the campaign is getting juicy, it ends. In previous titles through the Gears franchise, you'd make your way through linear but over-the-top, insane action-filled levels. You'll have some small puzzles like staying in the light to avoid Krill, but where in Gears of War 5, they give us an open world and RPG mechanics that just don't work. Larger enemies have health bars. You can find upgrades and resources to upgrade Jack. Fuck, you can even play the campaign 3-player where someone plays as Jack. Who the fuck asked to play as Jack? Who asked for an open world Gears of War game? I get evolving the game, don't get me wrong, but it's an over-the-top insane action title, not an open world RPG game. And why is the vehicle for open world traversal a skiff? I got no fucking idea. Now at the end of each act in the campaign, you'll go up against a boss fight. The end of the prologue, you'll go up against a Swarmac, which is a swarm version of a Brumac. By hitting the weak points that glow because video games, you'll take out the Swarmac. Fuck, that is an awful name and I'm gonna get to that later. You'll then take on the Matriarch, which is, well, a fucking berserker from Gears of War 1, but it's got a weak point and it's on its back. Now in Gears of War 1, you'd use the Hammer of Dawn satellite weapon to basically cook the berserker from the inside out. In Gears 3, you'd face them again, but you could use the Scorcher flamethrower to do the same thing. Gears 5, the matriarch needs to be frozen with a cryo cannon. Again, I'll get to that later, and then you shoot it in the back. Now it's an entertaining boss fight, but the mechanics for the level and the fight itself feel cheap and basically a rip-off of the Berserker and the Lambert Berserker we faced in previous games. But the boss fight here also feels kinda broken. For example, if you don't have a cryo cannon, you can shoot out the frozen lake around the matriarch for it to fall in, instantly freezing it. And after you put some rounds into the glowing portion of the matriarch's back, because video games, it'll randomly unfreeze. Fuck off, that thing's submerged in water. You'll then take on the Crate Dragon. Sorry, I mean the sandworms from Dune. You get the picture. Now this boss fight is pretty straightforward and boring too. You'll take out the tentacles surrounding you like the Leviathan from Gears 2 and Gears 3. Again, an unoriginal boss fight this time. Though, these openings in the tentacles shoot out swarms of flying leeches, which I will say are another ripoff of the krill from previous entries in the game. But then, as the boss fight evolves and further progresses, it gets more generic like the Leviathan, and you'll need to shoot out clawed tongues that try to reach out and grab you. You'll go up against more Swarmax, then the same giant worm again before using a railgun to take it out. It's a pretty boring, rinse and repeat shit, and it isn't really creative. We got some new enemy types, that's for sure, but the bosses are just reskins and remakes of fights we've already done, and they were done better in the past. The first Berserker fight was full of tension, as you had to lead the Berserker outside to use the Hammer of Dawn. Now as the Berserker can't see, you'll need to make noise and cause it to run into doors so you can move on to the next area. If you get hit by the Berserker, you're instantly down. The Leviathan's first fight in Gears 2 was inspired by Jaws and had a great setting and loads of tension, where the Kraken, yeah it's called the Kraken here, is so boring and obvious, even Stevie Wonder would see it coming. Speaking of enemy variants, it's all pretty boring and bog standard stuff, but there are a handful of cool and hard enemies like the Warden. Wardens are mini boss fights themselves that wield two giant maces. Shooting their helmets off and placing a couple of rounds into their head, or anywhere really, will take them down. Now you'll need to coordinate who's going to distract the Warden and who's going to deal damage to it or find ammo if they need it. But then there's stupid variants like the Stump. Swarm leeches have attached themselves to the technology of the cog, and they can reprogram them. That's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. An organic creature attaching themselves to fucking robots and changing their programming? That's like a spider reprogramming a self-checkout terminal in a supermarket. Gameplay wise, Gears 5 is an improvement in some ways to Gears 4, but in my opinion, it isn't as good as Gears 3. We've got the traditional weapons like the Lancer Assault Rifle, the Boom Shot, and the pretty shit snub sidearm, but there's also a heap of pointless weapons. What many consider to be, and well, what I consider to be one of the best weapons in the game is the Long Shot Sniper Rifle. Now you can use this as a simple bolt action rifle, but by clicking in the right thumbstick, you can zoom in. Now headshots are instant kills, and the Long Shot itself does a decent amount of damage as it is. And then there's the Marska Marksman Rifle, which acts like a generic rifle. A couple of shots to the head will explode heads, but it's a weaker long shot, and it doesn't need to reload after it's fired each round. Then there's the M-Bar Rifle, which again is a weaker version of the long shot and works near identically to the Marska, and also has a awful design, but holds 3 rounds and each round can be charged. Do we really need 3 different rifle weapons? Maybe 2, but not 3. For example, Gears of War 3 had 2 shotguns, the Gnasher and the Sawn-Off. The Gnasher was the traditional shotgun, while the Sawn-Off had awful range, to the point where you basically needed to be touching your opponent, but when you pulled the right trigger, they immediately turned into red mist when you fired, and it had a huge spread. Now there are also some flat up awful weapon designs like the Drop Shot, which is a ripped off version of the Digger from Gears 3. The Drop Shot fires a round that flies through the air, and by releasing the right trigger, the drilled explosive drops down onto opponents. So you need to keep an eye on where the explosive is and time it right before dropping it. A little bit like a guided rocket launcher. The Digger fired an explosive round into the ground that automatically shot straight forward and would automatically pop out of the ground when it detected someone nearby, so you could fire without having to fart ass around lining up shots. The Enforcer is a submachine gun that's pretty fucking pointless for a Gears game. You're either too far away for it to be useful, or you're too close that a shotgun's gonna immediately win that fight. Though there are a handful of sweet weapons like the Claw LMG, which is a bit like a swarm version of the Cogs Lancer and the Lancer grenade launcher. Not original in any way, the Lancer grenade launcher replaces its chainsaw attachment with a undermounted grenade launcher, but rather than firing straight ahead, it will fire the explosive round up into the air, explode and then rain fire below. But the bad weapons outweigh the good weapons by far, which kinda sucks when you look at it on paper. The cryo gun works like the Scorcher from Gears 2, but rather than firing, well, fire, it turns you into Mr. Freeze.
I'm afraid that my condition has left me cold to your pleas of mercy.
But the weapon is a heavy weapon, unlike the Scorcher, so you move stupidly slow and you can't stow the weapon on your back. Then there's heavy and pointless weapons like the Salvo rocket launcher. Now I don't know why we have this in the game when we have the far superior boom shot. Not only can you holster the boom shot on your back, you can also move at normal speeds. Anytime seeing anyone carrying a heavy weapon like this, I knew they were perfect target practice for a long shot to the face. Anyways, getting back to the original reason why I wanted to make this video, and that's because these new Gears games are basically Star Wars 7, 8 and 9. Gears 4 is The Force Awakens, following new characters who are connected in some way to the original Delta Squad. We get nostalgia, but we also really get nothing new. The gameplay is pretty much the same from Gears 1 to 3 with some reskins of weapons and characters, and they're claiming they're new. The Swarm is reskin of the Locust, just like the First Order is a reskin of the Empire. The bosses are reskins of previous bosses we've already faced before and were done better in the original trilogy. The character of Kate is the granddaughter of Queen Mira of the Locust. The only difference so far is we haven't had an original series character die yet in this series. Now that's not to say Gears 5 does nothing new for the world and the story like the Disney Star Wars films do, because those films literally add fucking nothing. There is great character development here, and just like in those crap Star Wars films, there's references to places, creatures and characters from the previous entries. But though there is great character development here, the story is irrelevant. The main villain for the game is Kate's mum, who's been corrupted and turned into this weird creature. Now she only appears at the arse end of the game and disappears. Other than the origins of the Locust and Kate's heritage, there is no story in Gears 5. Thankfully though, from Gears 4 we knew right at the end that Kate was related to the Locust in some way, rather than Rey being no one, someone, a random character, and then oh yeah, she's Palpatine's granddaughter and then goes by the name Skywalker.
Identity theft is not a joke, Jim. Millions of families suffer every year.
The story here is more fleshed out in regards to character development, but its gameplay has nothing really new to it. Its weapons are down is up variants. Let's replace fire with ice, digging weapons with dropping weapons, and giant cleavers with giant maces. The Swarm are, yes, an evolution of the Locusts, but you'd think after 20 years after the Locusts were defeated, they'd turn the remaining Locust bodies into mulch and fertilizer, rather than them just dropping them in ditches.
Some kid, he just hooked himself right into the wood chipper. What? Head first right into the wood chipper.
Even the names of some enemies, like the fucking Swarmak. The Swarmak? What the fuck? Brumark was an original name for an original faction. Swarmark feels like the no-name brand of Doritos. When Gears 5 released, I was blinded by the hype, and while it's not the worst Gears game in the Gears series, that's Gears Judgment, it's still better than any Call of Duty game if you ask me. Though, if you look at every game in the series, Gears 5 has no real story, but just character development. It's basically like The Last Jedi. Events happen, but they're nothing major. There's a couple of fake out character deaths, but none of the original crew die. Now, we get to decide who lives and who dies with JD and Del, but seeing as these are new characters, we don't have any connection to these characters, and there's no real impact. If we had to decide who died between Marcus and Baird, that'd be hard. Baird is my favourite character, but Marcus is the character of the series. Even the small dialogue had between the characters of Kate and Del throughout missions are boring compared to the conversations we had with Marcus, Dom, Baird and Cole.
Jack's good people.
You just filled his small mechanical heart with joy.
Your ass is gonna be quiet till your skink ass quit. Oh, mommy, don't let the bad man hurt us. Fuck you. We're gonna whoop your mama's ass. Whoa!
There we go. One muzzled queen. Not you, her. You were great. I loved your speech there, especially with the bitch-ass stuff. Very good, very enlightening.
But look, the gameplay is solid, and you'll never get tired of hearing the sound of heads exploding from a long shot round to the face. Now, if you've not played a Gears game before, Gears 5 is on the bottom of the pecking order for me. Well, second bottom, with Judgment being at the bottom, but it's still a good game. It may not be a great Gears game, but it's still a great action game. Gears 5 is available now, but if you've got Game Pass, I highly recommend you check out the entire series. But what about you? Are you a Gears fan? What did you think of Gears 5? Now, I've been a fan of it for ages, but naturally there are some who think the progressive changes made in Gears 5 were needed so the game could evolve. But I am curious for your thoughts and what you'd like to see from a Gears 6.